to Frontline Football, your weekly briefing on Army and Navy football. Each week, we bring you sound bites from coaches, players, and even the teams, analysis on how the Black Knights and the midshipmen played, and their preparation shaping this week's matchups. This is your front row seat to the Service Academy Gridiron. Let's dive right in. I'm Wyatt Kopelman, joined by Owen Kasanovich, part of Broadway to Broadway. Owen, Army couldn't have asked for a better week and an opponent to get back into its winning ways. First win on the season at Kansas State. Junior quarterback Cale Helms starts for Dwayne Coleman. It was Helms' debut for Army at quarterback. He rushed for the game-winning touchdown with less than 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, nearly 130 yards on the ground, and what a way for Army to get that win this season.
Yeah, huge win for Army, defeating Kansas State, holding them to 8 points in the second half after kind of a slow start in that first half. You mentioned Cale Helmus with those touchdowns, and the game winner accounted for 3 total touchdowns. This is a big win for Army against a team like Kansas State on the road. Kind of gets their momentum going into their next showdown with North Texas. They have a bye this Saturday, but definitely some good vibes for the Army Knights, Army Black Knights going into their bye week this week, getting to watch that film and see what they did well. And again, Helms making his first career start. Big time for him to play the way he did on the road in a hostile environment against Kansas State. So all signs pointing in the right direction after that tough defeat against Tarleton State in overtime. And it's good to see Army get on track here as they go into that bye week and getting ready for their next showdown at home against the North Texas Mean Green.
And quite a win, a historic win that is for Jeff Monken's crew. Army won its first game against a Big 12 opponent since September of 2006 against Baylor. That was also a 3-point win on the road, Owen. What a win for the Black Knights to get. They outgained Kansas State 192 to 48 in total yardage in the second half. But it wasn't all offense for this team to get to 1-1 on the season. Senior corner Colin Madison made his first interception of the year for Army in the fourth quarter to seal that 24-21 win. And now Army has a ton of momentum going into the bye week. Work on a couple of things as it relates to defense, some things schematically, some things that it sees within its position groups. Interesting to see how Army can build off of this. Navy, meanwhile, started conference play with a win against UAB. The senior quarterback, Blake Horvath, rushed for a 4-yard touchdown against the Blazers to win the game for the midshipmen. Here's what head coach Brian Newberry on his leadership from his quarterback, Blake Horvath.
Second year in the offensive system, and a lot of skilled guys around him that returned from a year ago as well. The majority of the new players are on the offensive line, right? So, and that's group starting to gel, and they'll continue to get better as the season goes. But yeah, his leadership and his knowledge of the offense, is in a better place than it was a year ago.
As impressive, Owen, was Navy's defense. Corner Philip Hamilton had a forced fumble and an interception in the second half, and only as a sophomore starting in his second career game. I have to think, with everything that Navy has done defensively in the first 2 games of the season, can at least be built on and carry forward into its upcoming games.
Definitely. And again, a second half shutout. You mentioned the interception. I mean, this Navy defense played phenomenal in that second half, pitching a shutout. And of course, with the leadership of Blake Horvath accounting for 3 touchdowns, the defensive line for Navy has been big time. Their secondary has played well at times throughout this season. A big win to get that first conference win, and definitely good momentum right now for the midshipmen squad.
This is being done, by the way, on the defensive unit with 12 first-time starters, at least the majority of which are on defense for Navy. They have a couple of underclassmen starting offensively, but all the while, it's 12 first-time starters, the most in the country. And this isn't a Power 4 team that's employing these 12 first-time starters, Owen. This is a program that wants to find a lot of diversity with its success from its position groups, whether it's in the skills or even in the trenches. Here's PJ Volker, the defensive coordinator for Navy, on the performance of his new defensive starters and how they're relying on the veterans here in this 2-0 start.
As coaches, I think all the time we talk about how challenging it is to win Division I football games. And guys coming from the prep school, guys coming from, high school, it's one thing to hear it, and it's another thing to be part of it. and there's big grown men out there that are trying to take your lunch money on every play. And I think, our guys started to experience that a little bit and really were like, oh, okay, I got to get going. And we had older guys talk to him. Luke Pierce talked about in one of our unit meetings about, he's like, man, I played, high school football in Florida. There's great ball, a bunch of good players, all that type of stuff down there. I thought, my first opportunity, I'd be, prepared and ready and all those types of things. And he's like, you don't really know until you get that burn, you get that action, you're under those lights to be able to understand exactly what it is. And I think, that's just how we are right now. We're learning the game. We're learning the flow of the game. We're learning how good and talented the teams are that we go against at really all different levels.
It is going to be a critical test for Navy because, as he said earlier in the week, when I got the chance to hear from him on a press conference of his, how Tulsa can be very disruptive schematically on both sides of the ball. It doesn't just look at a lot of physical traits in within its own program to have an advantage over others. It lost to New Mexico State by only 7 this past week, and Tulsa didn't by any means finish last season on a high note. 1-5 in its last 6 games, including a blowout loss to Florida Atlantic. But the midshipmen, they're not looking at this opponent any differently. They know that there's a certain task at hand.
Yeah, obviously, again, the defensive line is going to be big. The secondary is going to be big against the Golden Hurricane. It's a Saturday night game, so the atmosphere will be big time in the American Conference. And again, I think Blake Horvath and that offense are going to be the key for the midshipmen to come away with a win on this one. Again, just being able to, last week they kind of started slow. They were able to put up points, and the defense was kind of in a back and forth affair with UAB there. But again, able to pitch a second half shutout. I think you could take away positives from that if this game kind of starts out the same way. You have that defense to kind of learn from, and as the game goes on, you're able to make adjustments. So again, if Navy's able to just keep being able to do what they've been doing so far in this young season, I think they walk away with a big road win in the American Conference against Tulsa.
And what leadership they have on their defense, the senior outside linebacker and nickel, Kenneth McShann, heard from him last week on Navy's weekly press conference, how much maturity there is, I think, that can factor into the discipline this team shows in its games so far. It's already playing American Conference games. It can't afford to take those cheap flags that can cost you 3 points, maybe even a touchdown or two to lose a lead. This team has yet to trail this year, by the way. So I think it is definitely a product of the leadership that this team has from Blake Horvath, but also with certain leaders like McShann and even defensive tackle Landon Robinson as well. Navy is back in Annapolis on September 27th, rather, after a bye week to battle Rice, and then it stays home to take on Air Force on October 4th. Air Force, another team that Army takes on as well. The Black Knights are off this week before opening American Conference play against North Texas on September 20th. Then they go to East Carolina just 5 days later. Talk about a stretch early on in the season that can be difficult to encounter. The Black Knights then get Tulane on October 18th and then Air Force on November 1st. So it seems like, albeit the Black Knights don't get Notre Dame this year, Owen, that it could still be a relatively difficult schedule the rest of the way to get into that American Athletic Conference championship game.
Yeah, we know the American is a physical conference. It's a performing conference. You mentioned Army's next 4 games there and down the stretch. It's important to just take care of business, right? 1 week at a time in this conference. And again, will it be Navy? Will it be Army representing the American Conference potentially in that championship game? I lean towards Navy. I feel like with Blake Horvath, you have a don't have any quarterback questions. I know Army's quarterback was able to have 3 touchdowns in this last game, but again, just being able to have a week off for Army, I think helps to be able to kind of look at what we've done well so far early in this season and kind of get ready for North Texas and in this next stretch, being able to make the proper adjustments as far as, whether they've been bad at penalties, a couple penalties that they haven't liked on the, offensive line or whatnot. But again, you could say the bye week coming early in the season is a little unfortunate. But also at the same time, if they had a couple nagging injuries, just with the style that Army plays, it could really benefit them as far as getting ready to go into these next four games and hoping to continue the way they played against Kansas State, which I think as a team, when you have your leaders on offense, your leaders on defense, and your coaches, it kind of gives you confidence that, okay, I know we lost to Tarleton State week one, but we are able to play some of our best football against a Power Four team in a conference like the Big 12, who, yeah, maybe the Big 12, it's a high scoring conference. There's not a lot of defense, but it still is a physical conference. And I think if you're Army and you can play that way against a team like Kansas State, that bodes well for the rest of your American Conference play.
You mentioned the timing and implications of having the bye week this early in the season. Navy gets it a little bit later, but sticking with Army, do you see there being something positive to look out of that loss to Tarleton State coming in the season opener up in New York, as opposed to it being a shocking loss to take to an FCS team come week 8, week 10? And shoot, the team's only 3 weeks, 2 weeks away from playing in that conference title game.
I definitely think it benefits them, right? Because it's week one of the season. There's so much unexpected. You don't really know what you're going to get if there's a new coordinator or coordinators plural on offense and defense, or offensive assistants. But the nice part about losing to a team like Tarleton State, if your Army, is you can overcome that, right? Like there's a lot of season left. You're able to still have your conference games left. You're able to still kind of rebound and say, hey, what can we do better? What did we not like about the way we play? And remember, they didn't really know what they had at quarterback because their starting quarterback got hurt in camp. So they're kind of going into game one, okay, we're going to run our offense, but what do we have here? Now they've kind of figured it out with Helms at quarterback and able to kind of see, okay, this guy could potentially be a leader on offense for us. So it gives them a good platform to kind of say, okay, we have one start under this guy. He had 3 touchdowns, was able to play really well. Now we have our bye week. We have more opportunity to kind of see what we have in practice and how we can run our system. And again, going down the road in American Conference play. So I think it really benefits Army. And you touched on Navy having their bye week later in the season. I think Navy's like, okay, Army might get their bye week early. It might help them because they had that week one loss. But if you're Navy and you keep stacking wins and you go into your bye week, you got to be feeling pretty good about yourself as well with the leaders on defense and obviously Horvath, a leader on offense.
For Army, do you think it'll be easy for this offense to adapt to Cale Helms as opposed to the quarterback they thought they were getting in Dwayne Coleman out of camp?
I do. I think as long as he's able to play well, Helms should be a leader on offense for that team, and Army should be able to adjust to his play style very nicely, and I think it should be a good fit for this team. You know, again, you can only impress your guys with a big win on the road against Kansas State, so I think he will be able to provide a spark for this Army Black Knights team.
All right, well, let's see how the midshipmen, meanwhile, perform this week. Coming up, they have a big game, first game on the road against Tulsa. Meanwhile, for Army, off this week until taking on North Texas. That just about does it for the first ever edition of Frontline Football. I'm Wyatt Kopelman saying so long, and for my co-host, Owen Kasanovich, we've delighted the chance to have you aboard. Thanks again for joining us here. Look forward to bringing you another edition of it next week as we recap the midshipmen's game against their opponents.